We also have a number of intensive paid in-person workshops slated for May and June, such as a poetry performance workshop with Mary Lou Newmark and a workshop titled Navigating Without Instruments by Tracy Kato Kiriyama. Aside from our workshops, we offer a number of readings, such as a book launch of The Stand Poems by Linda Ravenswood, happening next week on Friday, May 13th, and the book launch for Alison Hedge Coke's Look at This Blue, similarly happening next week, Saturday, May 14th. So for more information on all of that, please visit our website, beyondbaroque.org. And finally, we offer a number of memberships to Beyond Baroque for as little as $50 for single memberships, $75 for a dual membership, and purchasing membership is an enormous help during this pandemic to make sure that we have online and in-person programs like this for free. So a word of special thanks to our wonderful staff here, especially those who are with us tonight. Thank you to our Executive Director, Quentin Ring, our Technical Director, Dan McNay, our Programs and Communications Fellow, Ivan Salinas, our Publicity and Marketing Intern, Megan Leahy, and our Programs and Publication Intern, Jade Lacey. Thank you all for the work that you do behind the scenes tonight and always. Thank you to the writer and collaborators reading with us tonight. We will be joined by Katya Apekina, Kathy Fish, Kij Johnson, Lisa Locascio, Ilana Masad, Silvia Park, and David Ulin. So thank you for them being here. We are going to have a number of them zooming in to the space today, so that'll be fun and interesting. And a big thanks and gratitude to the curator of 7x7.L.A, Axel Wilhite. Yeah, please, round of applause. It's been really wonderful to work with Axel through all of this, and we're kind of happy and a little sad that tonight is the closing. But without further ado, I'll pass it on to Axel to say a few words. Axel Wilhite, thank you.
Thanks, Jimmy. So I'm very happy to welcome all of you to the third and final reading for the exhibition 7x7.L.A, Select Artists and Writers collaborations. 7x7 is a collaborative game invented by myself and the writer Amy Bonifants 9 years ago. It's played by one artist and one writer via email over the course of 2 weeks. And in it, the artist and writer take turns advancing a story in their creative disciplines with words or image. During the game, the participants are prohibited to discuss or plan the game while they're playing. They can't discuss what images mean or deliberate on where they see the collaboration headed. They can only move the collaboration forward with their responses. As each participant tries to interpret and respond to their partner's work or text, the collaboration quickly takes a life of its own and never really fails to swerve into wild, uncharted territory. The game ends upon completion of 14 days, and that means 14 interleaf pieces, basically 7 artworks and 7 pieces of text. Over the last 7 years, 7x7 has published more than 160 of these original collaborations. And tonight you're going to hear 7 of my favorite. These are 7 incredible interdisciplinary exchanges. 3 of the collaborations are featured in the gallery exhibition here at Beyond Baroque. If you haven't had a chance to view the show, I urge you to do so. I think Beyond Baroque will be open after the reading. The other 4 collaborations are standout works pulled deep from the 7x7 archives. You're in for a treat. I love all of them. Before we begin, I would like to thank Quentin Ring and the staff of Beyond Baroque for this opportunity to share all of this work with you, to share this project with you, yeah, and for all of their tireless effort, hosting this exhibition and administrating these readings. I mean, it's been really wonderful, and thank you so much. So without further ado, I'm going to, let's start.
Thanks, Axel. I will also make a note that we do have several of the writers' books today for sale in the bookstore. So please, after the reading, check them out and take some home with you. But we will start off the night with Silvia Park in collaboration with Lorraine Bubar in Peel Me Open and Take Me Home.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be reading with everyone today. And thank you to 7x7 and Beyond Baroque for drawing this all together. I'd also like to thank Lorraine, my collaborator. Stitching this story together with her beautiful artwork was such a pleasure. All right, so Peel Me Open and Take Me Home. The geese are drowning. My mother-in-law insists she can see the lake from her window. They're diving headlong into the water, she says, never rising to the surface. She's always cooking up ways to lure me to the lake. She can't leave the bed, knuckles obscenely white as she clutches her sheets, so she sends me in her stead. The lake has turned black and blue. The lake is burning. The geese are drowning. The horses spook near the lake, so I tie my mare to the closest tree. Daniel, who's late and leisurely as he heads to the fields, laughs when he sees me unload my gun. Again? What does she see this time? I give a smiling, helpless shrug. Everyone thinks my wife ran out on me a year ago. The greater crime, in their eyes, was leaving her mother behind. The house belongs to my wife's parents. For 6 generations, they've owned 60 acres of the land, including the lake. Their women are renowned beauties with red hair that curls possessive around the fingers. My mother-in-law wore warhorse to the waist, plaiting it with cardinal flowers from the laughing stalks. Her hair faded to a slow, cruel white after my wife disappeared. There are no geese, not even a speck in the sky. Despite myself, I stare at the lake. The surface is still rippling. Leaves float, some green, some gray, like feathers. I poke my gun between the laughing stalks, parting them like a curtain. Slender and lanky as a teenage boy, they grow a year long and bloom in the summer. When the petals open, laughter is set to echo for hours until they wilt by sundown, shriveled and brown, as if they've been sucked clean of blood. Some say the laughter is shrill and pleading like a child. Some swear it was deep, the belly-shaking mirth of a drunken bearded man. There's a lot of superstition against swimming or fishing in the lake during the summer. Don't go near the lake when the flowers are laughing. The petals are closed tight, but when I touch them, they peel back and mouth at my fingertips, like lips wrapped around a secret. I need to cut the flowers before they bloom. The petals clamp down as if to draw blood. I yank back. A whine fills my head. The sound is unnatural and impossible. I aim my gun and pull the trigger close to my ears. I can't hear the bang, which means I'm awake. But the flowers are laughing. I fire again. The laughter seeps into my ears and crosses my eyes. Someone calls out my name. I haven't heard anyone say my name since I lost my hearing as a child. It's my mother's voice. She stands before me, waist deep in the lake, clutching my brother's arm. They're both drenched, my mother's white shawl see-through with seawater. I feel arms wrap around me. It's my wife, her chin on my shoulder, her red hair entangled and possessive. My wife kept her hair short. The gun has loosened, nosing the ground. The laughter is gone. The vision of my mother and brother vanishes. My veins have burned through the laughing stalk's poison. These are parasitic, carnivorous plants that will pull out any trick to drag their victims underwater, where the roots patiently wait. Free, I feel lonely. Lovingly, a flower man's white boneless fingers wrap around my ankle. I kick away their limp grip and quell the desire to shoot them in the face. They're harmless, my wife used to say. Aren't they adorable? Not if they're in a horde. I count only 3 today, hidden amongst the laughing stalks. A flower man flops onto their back, flashing their privates, then their belly again. They can only crawl. Their skin is translucent with spidery green veins. The dirt never clings to them. They're pristine. Their hair is cardinal as my wife's and her mother's and all the women in their family. They're also pests, symbiotic to the laughingstocks. Daniel, showing off his strength, once cleaved a flower man's skull in two, and from it spilled forth furry bees and butterflies with bent wings. The flower men lure insects with their sweet scent and grab mindlessly at anything and put them in their mouths like toddlers. Sucking at their finger, the flower man reaches for my ankle again. I'd step back, but the face of this one looks familiar. I want to crouch down and lift their chin with my fingertips, their deep-set eyes and full lips. My wife preferred to close her mouth when she smiled. My mother-in-law is on the floor when I return to the house. She pulls herself up, tangled in her quilt, with admirable composure and says, "Well?" I'd forgotten about the geese. I thought she would have too. I yank off my jacket and find a gray-green leaf in the hood and hold it out to her. I sign that she must have seen the leaves floating in the lake and thought they were feathers, but my mother-in-law pushes away my hand. "Did you see her?" she says. "Who?" I sign, but she knows I'm playing dumb. I grab her by the arms and drag her to the bed. It's rather disgraceful, and she twists and screams. "Soon the wheat will burn and the horses will break their legs. If you don't bring her to me, we'll end up with another calamity like you." I actually have a hard time reading my mother-in-law's lips, but I'm certain she called me calamity. She's called me pest, curse, disease since her daughter chose me. No one was surprised when my wife left me, but everyone was shocked she'd married me. I'm an outsider. My mother and I traveled across country to join my brother, who was working in the fields as one of the village researchers. I used to tag along, a silent teenager with a gun, with a rifle, and watch my brother collect the flower men's pollen. Sometimes I'd hold them down so he could cut their stigma. My wife, who was engaged to Daniel back then, used to watch me. It's true, I have diseased my mother-in-law. As she flops onto the bed, the quilt pools to the floor. Her legs are brown and papery. The toes have long since crumbled away. "Bring her back," she gasps. "Please don't cry," I sign to her. It's unfair how much they look alike, mother and daughter. This is the face I would have seen every morning as we grew old together. "I'm sorry," I say, touching the tip of her braid like a paintbrush still soaked in the blood I've spilled. I waited until my mother-in-law is asleep before I returned to the lake. My wife and I used to walk to the lake after sunset, even if it took hours. She told me stories about her family. When her ancestor was an impoverished young man, he used to work in another village. On his way home, late at night, he'd pass by the lake and hear the sounds of laughter. The laughter was so bewitching, he would search the reeds for the source, but never found anyone. One night, he heard a noise from the lake that wasn't laughter. It came from a blood-red plant he had never seen before. The man peeled the thick petals open and found the baby crying inside, scalp stained red from the petals. He took the baby home. She refused milk or food and would only sip water from a soft blanket. The baby grew into a girl in 3 days. The girl became a woman in 2. She could neither speak, nor hear, nor see. The man married her. Ever since, the laughingstocks have invaded the lake. When the laughingstocks fail to bloom, their bulbs wither and droop, sinking to the bottom of the lake. Days later, flower men crawl out of the water, slick as newborns. My wife yanked at her hair whenever she told these stories. She'd cut her hair short, close to her ears after we began seeing each other. I used to pull her hand away and tell her about my old village and the ranch we used to own. The war for horse, I signaled above my head, then drew on her palm. "I can't," my wife signed back. "I don't know what will happen if I leave." I never imagined I would stay in this village without her. The lake is all I have left. I visit it every night and feel a cold comfort whenever I see it gleaming, an unchanged silver. I slow down as I draw close. The laughingstocks used to stand taller than any man, their petals greedy and grasping as if they'd swallow the moon. They're dead now. They've all withered, the same parched brown as my mother-in-law. Their bulbs have sunk into the water, stems snapped in two. Bubbles tremble across the surface as one laughing stalk releases choked laughter underwater. Where have the flower men gone? I comb through the grass and sift for tracks in the soil. Flower men usually sleep like infants, napping during the day in fickle patches, waking up with startled jerks in the middle of the night. I once stepped on a dozing flower man. Their mouth dropped in a silent scream that wasn't quite fear, but sheer irritation. I found them a little amusing back then. Further from the lake, near the tree where I tied my mare this afternoon, I tracked down a flower man crawling. Oh, it's that one. The one who looks like my wife, mouth pursed in concentration as they grip the grass in clumps and pull themselves forward. As I reach for that face, the flower man is yanked backward. A little help, Daniel says. He holds the flower man by the ankle, an axe slung casually over his shoulder. I eye his axe, but he smiles. Let's bring her back to the lake. I feel like a teenager again, helping my brother in his field research. My gun feels cold and heavy against my back as I lift the flower man by the arms. Daniel seizes the legs, which don't end in feet. They taper into the slender tips of carrots and radishes, knotted with thick, confused roots. The flower man doesn't struggle, but they're heavier than they look, as if their feet are tied to the earth. The flower men, unnerved and spellbound my brother, who had intended to stay only a year to study the village's frost-resilient crops. For every plant in the village grows bread. Even the barley yields the softest, richest bread, stained pink. My brother never wanted to leave, but when he found out my wife and I were planning escape, he didn't drag us before my wife's family. He emptied his savings to bribe the captain and buy us safe passage, including his and my mother's. The guilt I feel toward my mother rattles every day and cuts me inside. But what I feel for my brother is smoother and heavier, like a stone that will always sink. I miss him. Daniel drops the flower men by the lake. I lay down their head gently. Such a soft skull, the bone not quite fully formed. The flower man flips over and carves a hand through the water. They smile open mouthed at the ripples. Before I can recover my breath, Daniel lifts his axe and swings it down on the flower man's neck. I knock away the axe with a swing of my gun. Daniel stares at me in pure astonishment, as if I'm the one who scared him. What? He looks down. Oh no, you don't think this looks like her? He's right. I palm the flower man's face and they close their eyes in contentment. Can Daniel blame me for my foolishness? I'm positive he doesn't blame me for stealing his fiancée. He's fond of me, if only because he loved my brother. They were lead researchers on the same project, inseparable as they tried to untangle the laughingstock's delicate, parasitic hold of the village's ecosystem. Daniel rests his elbow against the handle of the axe. I have to bleed her out, he said. If I don't bleed the lake, the plants start to die. After you took her, all the laughingstocks shriveled up. Then the grass, the trees, even the little potted plants inside our homes. Is there nothing we can do? I sign. The flower man has already grasped my finger, like an infant does a newborn mother. We've tried cattle and sheep, even a bit of our own blood. We could try bleeding your mother-in-law, Daniel adds idly. See if that'll quench. But everyone decided it was too risky. My wife told me when her great-great-grandmother passed away without bearing a daughter, her death unleashed a plague on the village. The blood-red crops turned white, then crumbled to dust, even as the rain taunted them overhead. More than a quarter died of starvation and illness. Some people think she's still out there, alive somewhere, Daniel muses. They think she used you and then left you. I smile foolishly again. Daniel returns a brotherly smile. You wouldn't have come back if she did. I don't have the words to comfort Daniel. I could sign to him that my wife didn't take the idea of escape lightly. She'd mourned her family, her home, even her ex-fiance. Daniel has always been good to me, she said. Everything she had ever known, she'd left behind. Before we'd even boarded the ship, she was quaking and whispered of dizziness and nausea. My brother checked her pulse, which was faint. My mother, who had never warmed to the village, was happy to fuss over my wife, promising it was just nerves. Why did you come back? Daniel asks. I stroked a hair from the flower man's face, which echoes my wife's, and of course her mother's. The flower man clasped my hand. Their touch is so weak. When my wife kissed me, she liked to pinch my ears. She said I had very small ears and she found that lovely. The flower man kisses me on the lips. Their breath smells of overly sweet flowers, as if I could be drunk on them. Their kisses wet their lips with my tears. I nod at Daniel and brace myself for the swing of his axe. But Daniel drops the axe. He grabs the flower man by the shoulder and turns him over. He looks stunned. Breasts, he says, and for a moment I want to giggle because the word is so innocent. The flower man's chest is no longer concave, but heavy and full. Their genitalia have subtly withdrawn and peeled open. Daniel reaches for it. The flower man's eyes clear, as if a fog has lifted, turning bright and sharp. Their teeth latch onto his throat. Daniel's jaw drops. He must be screaming. As the flower man suckles blood from his throat, their hair grows red and long, swelling past their shoulders. Their root-like limbs tremble in ecstasy, probing the air blindly. Daniel wrenches the flower man away, and with him a dangerous chunk of his flesh between their blunt teeth. I seize Daniel's axe, but he shouts at me. Don't kill it, he seems to be saying. Don't kill thee, don't kill thee. I misread his lips several times until I realize he's mouthing, boom. The flower man flops onto their back, peering up at me, eyes guileless, mouth red. My wife, as she clutched my hand on that ship, had made me promise. As we drew further away from her village, her hair had faded and turned brittle white. Her skin wrinkled into coffee-stained paper. She vomited wet black soil and dead gray worms. I tried to have the ship turn back, but there was a storm coming. In uprooting my wife, I'd killed her. The storm might have taken my family, but I'd taken my wife. I'd committed the same crime as her ancestor, the man who took the baby from the laughingstock and cultivated her into his wife so she could bear him infected children. Dying, my wife had signed to me and made me promise. Cut down the flower men before they flower into women. When I lift the axe, the scream is startling. Sound has never been a part of my world, except when I was hallucinating from the laughingstock's toxin. It's coming from the lake. The flower man quakes, as if terrified. They're trying to crawl away again. Daniel is still and pale, but breathing. I hold onto the axe two-handed, but loosen my grip and wade into the waters, past the laughingstocks. When I'm waist deep, I find a single laughingstock, budding. It has sucked away the life of all the stalks surrounding it. The screams sound muffled. I peel away the petals, velvet as flayed skin. Inside, a baby is screaming. Their scalp is dyed red from the flower. Their eyes are clenched shut. My axe trembles in my grip. My wife would whisper, cut it down. Not with an axe. An axe is too cruel. I'll wrap my fingers around their throat. The baby stops crying when they feel my touch. Their sightless eyes find mine. They grasp at my hair and tug. Their cheeks round as they laugh. I can hear them laugh. Oh, I say. Oh. Oh. The baby's fingers open and close. I hold the baby by the softest part of the skull and cradle her in my arms. I smell the top of her head, sweet as rotting flowers. My mother-in-law should be waking up soon. She'll tell me the geese are drowning, the lake is burning, the village is sinking. But when she sees this baby, tears will fill her eyes because no matter how much we render the world to pieces, the world will find a way to dig deep and burrow into the soil and sleep, then wake and laugh and live. The baby tugs my hair again. Don't worry, I tell her. You'll grow beautiful, long red hair someday. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Please give it up again for Silvia Park. Up next, we have Markel in Dolores. Please welcome.
For organizing this and to be on Brook. I think the first thing is an image, right? Okay. I traveled to this village once as a child. It was on the Amalfi coast near Pompeii, the village that ash from a volcano had preserved perfectly. My family was living in Italy. We were refugees waiting for the United States to approve our immigration status. I was only 4 then, but my sister was 7, and she confirms my memory of this afternoon. My family had not intended to stop at this village, but on the train, my father was offered a job by a short hirsute man. My mother and my father, my sister and I disembarked with that man, who I seem to remember having a limp. We walked for what felt like a very long time, carrying our bags to this man's shop. I remember sitting outside with my sister on the edge of a cobblestone street across from a bakery. It was hot and we were hungry. We were told to stay put while our mother talked to the baker, but then we saw the cats. First one ran by, then another. Then a whole flood of cats ran past us. Though we rarely disobeyed our parents, curiosity got the better of us, and we followed the cats through the narrow streets and alleys, and finally onto the beach. There must have been hundreds of cats on the beach. I remember watching in shock as one by one they entered the ocean and disappeared. Later, when I became a dog, I would think about that afternoon in Italy with a strange mixture of revulsion, excitement, and nostalgia. Those filthy cats swarming the streets of the village and then disappearing so mysteriously into the ocean. Those filthy, wet cats filling the water. Few memories from my human life have brought me much happiness, which is why most of them have receded. I can only vaguely recall the house I grew up in, the boarding school in Michigan, my job as a waiter. All my memories have dimmed, with the exception of those that involve my current interests: cats, squirrels, feces, and Dolores. Dolores. She is, of course, the reason I became a dog. Some people have asked me if I regret my decision to become a dog. I have seemingly given up so much. But as an immigrant, the idea of straddling 2 worlds, existing as 2 people in one body, it was not foreign to me. As a dog or as a human, I am still me. As humans, Dolores and I were inseparable. We met in kindergarten. She helped me learn English. We sat next to each other in all our classes. And when the other children laughed at me for being strange or wearing my pants and hats wrong, Dolores always came to my defense. Once she even threw a rock at a bully's head and he needed stitches. Eventually, Dolores grew up and became a showgirl. A rich roughneck took a liking to her. He said, "Dolly," he called her Dolly, even though she couldn't stand it. He said, "Dolly, what do you want? I'll do anything you want. I'll buy you anything. You want jewels? You want furs? You want a nice car?" And she said, no, she had no use for any of that. Who needs furs in the desert? Besides, wearing furs always gave her a strange feeling. Being inside someone else's skin, it was disgusting. But it also filled her with complicated longing she was not yet prepared to deal with. "Well, what can I get you, babe? What can I get you?" her sugar daddy asked. There's one thing Dolores had always wanted. Build me a theater, she said, in the desert, outside underneath the stars. So he did, and because he was that sort of man, he covered the proscenium with models of her boobs. Later, after she left that man, Dolores took the theater with her. She had it deposited on a swampy plot of land which she inherited from a dead uncle. I believe it was in southern Louisiana. I never visited her there or saw it myself. I had lost touch with Dolores. I was at that point busy with my own life, beginning an unhappy marriage, denying my true urges, going to school to be a phlebotomist, a calling I was not suited for in the least, and working at nights as a waiter in a fancy restaurant downtown. Dolores was a distant vision, a fantasy at that point, a person who had managed to escape the bleak tableau of my life. As my marriage was falling apart, I began to take many long walks. One day I heard someone calling my name, but in such a small, thin voice, I thought maybe I had imagined it. I began walking again, but no, I heard it very distinctly. Lev, it's me, Dolores. I froze in my tracks. Dolores had been in the news a lot lately because she had disappeared. I looked around and of course I couldn't see her. A crazy thought occurred to me that I was being visited by her ghost, which is absurd. I don't believe in that sort of thing. And then I heard the voice say, "Look up to your right." I looked up and there on the mossy stone wall was the strangest thing I had ever seen. It was Pushkin's head on the body of a snail. This was a lot to take in. Alexander Pushkin was my favorite poet. My sister and I memorized his poems as children. He was our idol, and I remember showing Dolores Yevgenia Onegin for the first time. I had not realized it would make such an impression. Pushkin wiggled his snail horns at me, but the voice that came from his tiny mouth was most definitely Dolores's. I watched the shiny path the Pushkin snail made as he inched towards me. Dolores, I asked, was this possible? Was it possible? All right. Yes, Lev, I heard her voice say, it's me. It was a sunny fall day. The street was quiet. Many houses down, I could hear somebody vacuuming. I brought my face close to the snail with the strange human face. Dolores, I asked, embarrassed to be put in such an odd situation. Lick me, she said. Pardon? Oh, how many times had I dreamed about her saying such things to me when we were teenagers and both human. Oh, Lev, she said, just do it. So I did. The truth is, I love it when people tell me what to do. One of the problems in my marriage, I think, was that my wife expected me to take charge in the bedroom and outside of the bedroom too. It was miserable. I never felt safe. I stuck my tongue out. Go ahead, she said. So I licked her shell. I followed its spiral groove with the tip of my tongue. Then I licked her belly. When I opened my eyes, we were both sitting in a garden. It looked a lot like the cemetery we had hung out in as children, but more beautiful and with a waterfall. And then Dolores told me of her adventures and what I must do. Remember the last time you were happy, Dolores said. It took me a long time. I had to go through many layers of memories before I ended up in Italy. This was the last time I still had my sister and both my parents. It must have been terrifying for them to be stateless and living with so much uncertainty, but they never let on. I remember eating pears on the beach and burying the cores in the sand. We spent so much time by the ocean looking for green coins washed up on the shore. Think of the perfect day, Dolores said, and go from there. Thank you.
Once again, Katya Apekina, thank you so much. That was great. Next up, we have Kathy Fish in collaboration with Stephanie J. Ryan in Only What Haunts.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to thank Axel particularly for inviting me to take part in this, and everyone at Beyond Baroque, and most especially Stephanie J. Ryan and her amazing artwork that made it so easy for me to concoct a story around. It was just such a fun experience. Nothing I've done as a writer compares to that. So thanks so much. My story is called Only What Haunts. And it goes in two points of view, a crow and a teenaged witch. Crow. Crow entered the derelict farmhouse through the broken attic window. He settled on the very top of an oak chifforobe and surveyed its dim surroundings. Fluffing his feathers, he stirred up long, dormant layers of dust. The dust, made up mostly of dead skin cells, contained the DNA of generations and all the grievances, violence, and sloth and evil of those who lived there before. It swirled like a snowstorm around the attic, and the house remembered. Now a young couple had purchased the farmhouse for next to nothing and had set upon fixing it up. Crow saw the two of them earlier standing in the driveway, the man looking down at the woman, fingers curled on her shoulders like a talon. The man got into his car and drove away. She stood watching a while, then kicked at the gravel and went inside. There was a whoosh down below and the sound of a woman's startled cry. Crow cocked his head. Lorelei. A pool opened up above me. My hair rose as I broke the surface. I felt a shimmer in my bones as they knit back together. I emerged from the floorboards through the rush of water. All around me, birds came alive from the flaking wallpaper, frantic and disturbed. The past me and the present me melded. Though vaporous, I felt strong and powerful in a way I'd never felt when I was alive. I hung there partially suspended. I had no eyes, but I could still see. In the chaos of the coiling water and the darting birds, a solitary crow peered at me from his place on my grandmother's chifforobe. Who are you? I asked. Though he didn't speak, the crow had a lot to say. Crow. Who I am is not important. His feathers twitched. All this dust is ghost stuff. Everything that haunts the living is inside of it. There's a woman downstairs who is attempting to eradicate it. I'll scare her away, Lorelei cried. She hung half in and half out of the pool. She rose, grew breasts, a torso, legs. Her eyes opened. Crow stared and she yelped and tried to cover her naked body. Just then the door to the chifforobe swung open, filled with dresses and shoes and nightgowns and sunbonnets and straw hats of all colors, all in perfect condition. Lorelei walked on her own two legs. She yanked a frock off its hanger and quickly dressed. Pivoting this way and that, she preened before the full-length mirror. Leaning close, she touched her pink cheek. To Crow, she was quite vain for someone who looked nothing like a crow. Both heads turned at the voice of the woman downstairs, gently telling someone he was a good boy. Who is she speaking to? Lorelei whispered. She spun to the door, but couldn't open it. She twisted the brass knob. She attempted to walk through the door, but crashed into it. Crow picked up a gold key in his beak and dropped it into her outstretched palm. She unlocked the attic door and flung it open, Crow alit on her shoulder. Together they descended the stairs. And as they did, the birds that had been darting about settled back into the wallpaper. The pool in the center of the floor dried up. The door to the chifforobe slammed shut. The agitated dust continued to swirl. Lorelei. The room below came alive with ghost stuff. The grizzly my grandfather shot roared, clawing, crawling from the rug. And there was my tree, its limbs holding snow globes instead of leaves. And there were my mother's hands, her fingers moving, searching for her needlework. There were flowers made of blood, a three-headed dragon suspended in a teardrop. The woman traipsed around with a feather duster like she owned the place, standing on tiptoe to dust the transom, awakening even more ghost stuff. I clenched my fists. Crow dug his claws into my shoulder. Don't. I'd like to strangle her, I said, but the woman looked right through me. That's when I saw Henry sitting on a low stool, running a pudgy finger over the pages of his primer. I rushed to gather him up in my arms, but came up empty. Again and again, my hands grasped air. The woman turned to him. Would you like some apple juice? How does she see him and not me? They only see the ghosts that haunt them. I took flight and Crow launched from my shoulder. I soared to the ceiling, hovered, then swooped. Boo! The woman coughed. She went into the kitchen and opened a magical, light-emitting icebox. Crow landed on the woman's head, clawed at her hair. Absently, she ran her fingers through it, then took something from the icebox and closed the door. Henry, Henry, I cried, but he didn't hear me. Crow. Lorelei slumped on the floor, arms draped around her ghost child as he sipped juice from a straw. The woman, so small and delicate, moved, almost floated from room to room with her feather duster. Ghosts bloomed from the floorboards and materialized from the walls. The place was thick with them. Thick, too, with loss and pain and cruelty in the form of black bugs, a species Crow had never seen before. He saw everything. An ocean voyage, a man in a long, frayed black coat that flicked in the wind, a miserable and miserly, unlovable man. Compasses and ship manifests, a woman, tiny and delicate like the dusting woman, wearing a large bonnet. A house devoid of music and laughter. More blood flowers blossomed, black bugs leaked from the ceiling, puddled on the floor. Once there had been a tornado when all the others were out in the fields, even the child riding next to his grandfather in a horse-drawn tractor. They were all sucked up into the vortex and deposited in a neighboring cornfield. The farmhouse and the young woman, the sickly one who was locked in the attic room had been spared. She couldn't escape. The man in the black coat loomed. You started all this, Crow said. The hem of his coat danced and snapped in the cold wind that blew through the house. Trembling, the woman laid down her duster. The black bugs encircled even her. For the first time, Crow looked at her face and understood. Lorelei. Crow lowered his beak to my ear. We have to get rid of the ghosts now. Except Henry and I. No, you as well. The woman's in pain. She's dying of longing. They locked me in the attic. I know. I was 16. Again, I tried to pick up Henry. From the rug, the grizzly snarled. The wind gusted. The snow globes on the bare trees clanged. The man hovered near. It was then I recognized the ghost of my great-grandfather. Tyrant, misanthrope, ne'er-do-well. Crow spoke to him in his peculiar, soundless way. You're the alpha haunt. Send them all back. He eyed Crow. What's in it for me? We're hurting the woman, the alive one over there with the feather duster, said Crow. Crow flew at him then, poked his face with his eyes and hands. The woman sat crumpled on the floor. My great-grandfather thrashed the long sleeves of his coat until they became feathers. His eyes flamed. He yawped and cawed and flapped his new wings, terrorizing the others. The black bugs swarmed out the chimney. The blood flowers withered. The other ghosts whirled themselves into mist and seeped through the pores of the house. It was over, or so we thought. Crow. Lorelei swept up her boy and held him tight as the two dematerialized. The tiny woman lunged after them. I'm sorry, cried Lorelei. She and her boy dissolved into the very spot where she'd leapt to her death, from the attic window so many years before. Once they were gone, an elm tree took root and began to grow. It grew so quickly, its limbs creaked like bones. The woman scrabbled in the dirt until her fingers bled, begging them to return. And as she dug, the house, swept clean of dusts and ghosts and tyrants, began to forget. It forgot the sickly young woman imprisoned in its attic. It forgot the small boy and the farmer and the farmhands borne aloft by the cyclone. It forgot all the diseases, the difficult, fatal births, all its crimes and jealousies and regrets, the broken dishes and fists through walls. Amnesic of its pain, the house became new again. The woman rolled onto her back, eyes closed, chest heaving. Crow flitted about, unnerved. What would become of her now? In the absence of haunts, what becomes of the haunted? The elm tree had now grown as high as the highest peak of the rooftop. Crow alighted on a branch level with the attic window, which he found curiously still broken, displaying toothy shards of glass. He heard a car approach up the gravel driveway. The husband, of course. Crow tilted his head to one side and considered. Thank you.
Happy fish, folks. Thank you so much for that. Next up, we have Lisa Locascio in collaboration with Matt McLean in Divination. Give it up for Lisa.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. I really want to acknowledge the incredible work that has constituted this magazine for almost 7 years now. And I wanted to take the opportunity to recognize the incredible hard work of our editor and curator, Axel Wilhite, who has really made a magazine like none other. So congratulations, Axel. This is all thanks to your hard work. I had hoped to be there with you tonight, but as you might notice while I read, I have a bad cough. So I'm glad I'm not there causing anxiety for anyone who's near me. And I'm happy to read my collaboration with the wonderful Matt McLean, which is called Divination. 1. The boy took one of the tree's blossoms in his hands. Yeah, he said, the cherries bloomed a few weeks back, but now it's cold again. It was around 5, near dawn, late and early both. They stood beside her rental car in the little courtyard roundabout. Behind them, draped in clouds, stood an invisible mountain. The edges of the sky blued. The woman gripped her hands in the pocket of her sweatshirt, wishing gloves. They were both smoking a slow-burning brand, and the boy was ill-dressed for the weather in jeans and a fine cotton button-down. She had given him a blue hoodie to wear, both wincing at and thrilled by the maternal action of marrying the zipper's teeth and pulling it all the way up under his sharp chin. Were his hands cold? They didn't look it, cupping flower and cigarette. She would remember that, how he held the blossom in the globe of space between his hands. It reminded her of the way he had looked at her a few hours earlier. She was at the door, ready to drive him home, and said, I like you. I feel like the trees bloomed overnight, she had said when they came out to smoke. I didn't notice these before. The branches were heavy with cream and pink and the shadow color of leaves. She wanted to take his hand, but understood that she shouldn't. Soon, she would actually have to take him home. I'll miss you, he said in the dark bedroom. I won't miss everyone, and I wouldn't tell most people that I will miss, that I'll miss them. I'll miss you too, she had replied. You don't have to say it just because I said it to you, the boy told the woman. 2. Earlier that day, Yesterday now, 12 clicks back on the pale wheel of hours. The woman had reached the front of the line at the post office and realized she had not addressed her box. The man behind the counter gave her a label for free and told her to return to him rather than re-entering the line, a beneficence she knew she was supposed to repay with quick, neat compliance. Then she addressed the label both to and from herself, a Moebius strip of correspondence. Her eyes filled with tears. When the kindly postal worker disappeared into the back, she ran for the door and drove her rental across the small western downtown, parked, and pulled up a meditation on her phone. She lotus sat naked on a golden bench in a magenta room hung with gold roses, a cat purring beside her gleaming strong body. Before her lay a book with gilded, rough-edged pages, her name on the spine. In the threshold stood a man's silhouette. She extended her left hand, smiling. The cat yawned and rolled over, showing its tummy. Over dinner, she told the boy about crying at the post office, leaving out the emergency meditation and costume change that had made her late. All day, she had run errands in her favorite exercise tights, dodging man after man who remarked that he had never seen pants like that before. She had shed the tights into the morass of dirty underwear lumped on her bedroom floor, the first thing the boy saw when she brought him inside 6 hours later. Across the table, he formed and unformed. "Can I see your rings?" She dangled her hands as if he was a manicurist. He applied his gentle attention to all but the two on her left ring finger. 3. Later, the woman dreamed twice of her apartment under the mountain, on consecutive mornings when she woke at dawn and curled a smooth white stone into her hand to urge sleep's return. In the first, she sought another person amongst revelers assembled for a festival. Significant chunks of the western downtown had become yawning brown lots pitted with leftover snow. She did not find him. In the second, she stood in her apartment with her husband, surveying the belongings that had multiplied to fill every shelf and drawer, ludicrous and bright, mostly ceramic. Crude, as if shaped by a child or a disingenuous outsider artist. One day, the woman, then a girl, had gone with her lover and his father to the cramped house of an elderly couple who collected this stuff. The wife in white pumps offered the girl's lover's father a single glass of water before he spent hours hanging art they had acquired seemingly at random, good and bad, and in such great quantity that excess pieces lay all about in tall, horizontal stacks. But they had had a lifetime, the woman a month. How had she accumulated so much? She realized with great relief that she would never make her flight out of the mountain town, only 2 hours hence. No way could all of her garish altars of baked clay be made to fit in one box. She remembered smiling. She woke up. Actually, there hadn't been much to pack. She had cut the seams of the cardboard box to close it smaller. It was gone already by the time the woman brought another person into her apartment and showed him her kitchen, her bathroom and nook, her chair and desk, the stones arrayed on top, shed her rings and bracelets into a jangling pile. Oh, oh. A song the woman liked to hear when she drove her rental car through the mountain town hinged on those sounds. She had other totem songs, one with clapping, one synth-heavy happiness right out of her childhood, one in which the singer stretched 3 words into a lascivious, repeated complaint. The song sustained her through the days she roamed the wide boulevards and drove the downtown and had meetings, helplessly blinking tears for hours. Those moans and sighs, promises she couldn't imagine. Oh, oh. Often the woman got lost or missed her on-ramp and barreled instead some new way in this place where she did not live, save for these handful of weeks. The rental car gliding past industrial forts and neon marquees done up as faces, and lonely streets across which the wind tugged actual tumbleweeds. Then the hook resumed, or a guitar crunched a mouthful of tremolo, or a vocal rapped her, and again, the woman was saved. Never more than on her final drive to the airport, when on an hour of sleep, she sped through snow-dusted high desert, spun from threads of gold and silver. Oh, oh. How stunningly quick the difficult could become easy when knowledge filled its lack. At dinner, the boy offered her his own food, watched her raise it to her mouth, drove with her after for hours, demurred when she asked his plans. But all his lingering was lost on the woman until her bedroom, where the boy stopped her beside the pile of her underthings, an homage, she wondered now, to the real mountain outside, and turned on his pretty eyes, closed the space between them. It was hard to say what was better, feeling her body become a door, or the boy opening it. In your future, the decision has already been made, a seer had told the woman. You can set the intention for it to happen without pain. What did she want it to look like, her future? A house of white rooms, light and lush botanics, a spare chamber hushed as a church dominated by a tall iron sleigh bed, flowers on a long table, fish soup, salad with oranges. How bourgeois, who lived in this inspiration board? She could no more picture her husband in the white rooms than she could the boy. Perhaps pain was the only sure inhabitant. The woman believed in a gate beyond pain, but all she felt was vertiginous degeneration, drop foot of the heart, sending her soul forward. It felt better to send it back, to exercise her supernatural ability to capture, net minnows and recue their swimming spin at her convenience. At some bed crux, for example, the boy had paused his kisses to slide his right index finger into the corner of his mouth, moved it against the thick curtain of membrane, recalling that dental moment when the hygienist hooked the suction straw into the same spot and said, "Close." He withdrew and wove the finger between her legs and embraced her anew. Later, the boy's arm bent over her head and his thumb alit near her mouth. Greedily, the woman sucked, holding it in her teeth, pressed her fingers over her face, blindfolding herself, the tips meeting over her third eye, smiled at the inverted V between her palms, a shape that made her think of wings. I can't see, the woman thought happily. I can't see. In the escapade aftermath, she resolved to divine and scry every morning, peer at where she would be in 1 year, 2. For the woman, the bedroom was a cathedral, and her body the host, and the one who ate and drank her, supplicant and clergy both. And the thurible was her soul, breathing frankincense, dousing holy fluid. The woman always came with her soul, and when she came, she warned the boy, she would shake. At his first touch, she armored herself. Her soul was a slippery mollusk thing that loved to be held and would follow the boy home if she let it. A hungry woman of bottomless memory and intermediate clairvoyance. She was nostalgic already by the second kiss. When she bowed her head to the boy's long foot, its hand closed around his ankle. Armor or amour, her soul was going with him. It was vital to recall the stars that did not hang in the apse, the unpolished gems that she could push up inside her body, that the boy was frankly smooth, how he turned her, drew her, and serious and kind, reassured. Maybe her soul could ride along. Like friends, they took breaks, sought his shoe size, laughing, went for water. When she started at the lamp's silhouette, he drew her close, asking, "What?" She bade him to kneel, set her mouth and ran her hands on his dear body. When you were raised Catholic, what male odalisque is not plotted on that crucified axis of comfort and dis? Oh, she really couldn't get out of church, and she was a glutton. Why not summon his mouth as proof of God? With it, he called her familiar to him, said he liked her shaking, that it was sexy. Rich with this heady music, her temple filled the woman long after another person no longer did. Later, she wished she had given him a disclaimer. You who saw and fed and held my most lonesome self, I keep forever in my sacred heart, as is my curse and my power. More than a little morbid, likely to terrify, in any way she could lay no claim. This was the cost, along with the bit of her soul that had disappeared with him as she waited in the idling rental to make sure he got inside all right. Giddy, rich with happiness, aware how quickly she could keel to despair. As they drove, she took the boy's hand. He held it quite naturally in the well between the passenger seat and center console, interlacing their fingers, a sweetness that would never leave her. When she parked, they kissed as if the world was ending, which this one was. In the apartment, the woman gathered in a metal bowl 2 colorful wrappers that had held herb mixtures called Road Opener and Come to Me. These had produced a gallon of pungent, deep magenta tea she infused into her bath water to treat her sadness, and a slip of paper on which she had written her intentions. Each she ripped to shreds. It had begun to snow. The woman carried the bowl out into the thin dawn, dropped lit match after lit match onto the paper. When almost all was burned, she ran barefoot across the wet lawn to cast her ashes at the mountain's face. The wind blew them into her eyes instead. She made her wish, feet screaming. Inside, she drew a boiling bath and sat, releasing the last of the vehicle in which the boy had sent his soul inside her. In the future, she would sleep for 1 hour, pack, drive to the airport playing her song, back arched and arms thrust, lift her hand in front of her, a sign. Oh, thank you.
Lisa Locascio, folks. Thank you so much, Lisa. Appreciate it. Yeah, give it up, please. Next, we have Kij Johnson in collaboration with Holly Elander in Roll the Dice.
This was enormous fun to do. And I have to say, this was more playful than any of my writing had been recently. However, I didn't expect I was ever going to be reading it out loud. So just so you know, it's a dialogue. You walk through the doors. What do I see? You're in a medium-sized grocery store, very bright. There's signage everywhere and music. You don't see anyone. There are red tulips for sale on your right, $12.99 a bunch. The produce section is on your left, and they've got a big display of organic peaches from Chile, and there's that smell of dirt that produce sections have. You can see a display of cheap Shiraz ahead of you. Should I check out the Shiraz? I don't know. Do you like Shiraz? No, I'm asking, does the adventure need me to check out the Shiraz? Anyway, why is this adventure starting in a modern grocery store? Is your character standing in the entry asking the air that question? Because that's what's happening. No, I mean, I was just at the Hy-Vee on 6th on my way over here, and it was a lot like this, but it wasn't an adventure. It was just me doing stuff. Grocery stores aren't the starts of adventures? Not usually, though I'm sure you're about to do something wonderful. Am I? Your character is still in the doorway. All right, I go look at the Shiraz. I'm checking for traps. Roll a perception check on a D20. 19. There's no trap, but I'm going to save us both some time and tell you that the only traps here are hidden sugar in some foods and the little add-ons at the checkout. So you're at the Shiraz. While you're standing there, you notice there's an animal of some sort under the display rack. Does it look dangerous? You see no visible weapons, if that's what you mean. Can I see what kind of animal? It looks like a wolf. Is it really a wolf, or does it just look like one? It might be a coyote, but probably not, or a dog even. No, it's a wolf. Why is there a wolf in the grocery store? Are you asking the wolf? No, I'm asking you. I'm not there. Fine. My character walks to customer service. There is a customer service desk. There's a woman behind the counter. And I ask her, she's made out of animal horn. Why is there, she's what? Made of animal horn. She's translucent, different shades of brown and beige. She looks bored, but she smiles at her customer service smile and says, how can I help you? Did you roll for this encounter? The customer service woman says, what encounter? No, I mean you. Did you, the game master, throw dice and consult a secret table that said 14 on a D20 female human made from animal horn? Rules say I can do whatever makes the game interesting. And yet you said it in a grocery store. Interesting for me. I'm doing the work here. Do you want to run the game? Maybe. I mean, no. So I say, why are you made out of animal horn, if you don't mind telling me? She says, why not? Why are you made of blue jays? And you look down and realize that is exactly what you are made of. Your voice is not a single voice, it's lots of them, and you're all talking at once. One of you flies into the deli. The wolf follows that part of you. Am I all blue jays now? Yeah. How many me are there? 15. One of you in the deli, 3 of you are in the bakery, 1's on top of the express register, 2 are in customer service. Never mind. So the me, or me's, I guess, who's still at customer service, asks the woman, why is there an animal under the Shiraz? And why am I Jay's now? She's ignoring you, looking at scratch tickets. She doesn't speak to birds. Okay. The one in the deli with the wolf, that you is fluttering around. The wolf was snapping at you, but it gave up, and now it's sitting next to a refrigeration cabinet full of cheeses. I say, do you speak Jay or human or whatever I'm speaking? It does speak whatever you're speaking. It kind of barks at you. Can you do me a favor? What kind of favor? I ask it. I have this bone stuck crosswise in my stomach, and I need someone to go down there and pull it free. I'd reward you. This is the dumbest wolf ever. That story is 1,000,000 years old. Did you say that? Probably not. So my other Jays are coming over, staying carefully out of reach. And one of us says, ooh, that sounds awesome. Why don't we just peck our way in from the outside? The creature looks hurt. Well, there's no need to be snippy about it. I'm just hungry, that's all. Some of me say, you're in a grocery store. It's a dumb place to be hungry. It says, there's hungry and hungry. Roll a D20. D20 rolled. All right, I got 18. So the wolf or coyote tells you that what it really needs is for you to buy it a magazine. My Jays go, what? It wants a National Geographic. You're a Jay. It figures you understand shiny things like money. That's what 18 on a D20 means? No, that's what this 18 on a D20 means. It means that the wolf is tired of being in this grocery store all alone, tired of the cold air and the empty aisles at 3 a.m. And it's thinking, maybe reading an article about cephalopod intelligence on the Great Barrier Reef will somehow be enough to compensate for all this. It's bored. bored and lonely and maybe a little sad, yeah. I ask it, why are you here, really? Roll a d20. 8. It says, I'll tell you a story. There were 3 of us once, a woman made of scraps, a woman made of nameless dread, and a woman made out of a wolf. Together, we ran a truck stop where all the rivers met. Everyone came in sooner or later, and we fed them gasoline and cherry pie and soup bones and pencil erasers. Then it ended. The end. What happened? The creature says, who says anything happened? Because things happening is what stories are. Things happening is what your stories are. My stories are stories because they end with the end. Things happening is the part that matters to you. So I'm asking, how did you get here from your truck stop and your friends and the erasers and the cherry pie to here, to National Geographic's in a grocery store? The creature says, all right then, bring your J's together and I'll tell you about things happening. I forgot to tell you, the grocery store is getting harder to see around. It's not dark, it's like fog. Can I trust the wolf? Roll a d20. 19. You can trust it not to eat you. Okay, then I bring all of me back. It takes a minute. What was the rest of me doing? Jay stuff, made noise, stole food, broke things, flew around. 2 of you watched the woman made out of animal horn, but she just ignored you and started reading from a notebook that was behind the counter. Do you want details? No, we're good. Eventually, you all collect and settle down. It's getting harder to see clearly, and it feels as though the aisles are changing somehow, getting wider and emptier. You end up having to perch on the ground in a big circle around the creature, carefully, out of reach. Cool. It leans forward and says to the ring of your J's, things happening is not a story. That's just reality, random real life, a string of events that takes you between then and now. A story is when the things that happen mean something. Actions mean things. Feelings change things. But they don't really, not until you get to the end and look back. Do you believe that? The wolf does. Roll a d20. Seriously? Rattle those bones, friend. I got 7, but you hear sounds in the darkness, and a shape rises behind the wolf, a giant shadowy form. A what? It's a shape, a shadowy form, like I said, ghost-like. But why is it here? It's an adventure. You like when things happen, you said so. So scary monster thing happens. The wolf jumped up and is looking surprised. What do you do? Yeah, I like things happening, just not completely out of left field random things. And this shadowy form is where you draw the line. This is the one thing that you could reliably have expected in an adventure, a monster. So what are your J's doing? We all jump out of range too, I guess. Is it attacking us or anything? No, it's just floating there. But since you're paying attention, you notice you're getting a feeling off it, loneliness, like the wolf was sad. It doesn't seem to see you. It's caught up in its own thing. It picks up a bottle of Shiraz and some magazines and floats toward the customer service counter. We're following it. The woman made of animal horn rings the shadowy form through. The wolf went behind the counter with her. The 3 of them are talking together. Can I hear any of it? It's clear they know each other and that there's history, but they're not speaking a language you understand. The shadowy form hands something shiny to the wolf. What are the magazines? Car and Driver and Vogue? The shadow goes out through the front door and vanishes into the darkness. That's it? Nothing happens? No, I said that it bought some things. This was our first monster of the night. Actually, the wolf's a monster, and so's the woman. Our first scary monster. And you're a bunch of birds, so technically you're kind of a monster too. And it didn't pass on any secrets or try to kill us or trick us or give us a map or anything that would contribute to an adventure. A glass of wine and some magazines is the adventure it wanted tonight, so mission accomplished. This is what late night grocery runs are about, going into the darkness and finding a bright space that has what you need, maybe someone who's like you, alone and a little hungry. Anyway, the wolf says, hey, here's a story for you. Come see what it gave me. It's holding something in one paw. We come close. It's a gold coin. Wolf goes, see what it says right here? Roll a d20. Roll 12. It drops the coin and starts biting your J's. Roll a d6. 4. It eats 4 of you before the rest get out of range. What the fuck? How did that make sense? That was just random. Not true. Dice are like physics in an adventure. They're like Newton's laws in our world. You wanted things happening? Here's a thing. I wanted things that make sense. Don't trust wolves? That would be a sensible takeaway from this. Why do our games always end in chaos? Because they're not done yet. Somewhere down the road, you'll know the whole story. Which is what? Put the dice away, and I'll tell you. Thank you.
Kij Johnson, folks, thank you. Next up, we have David Ulin in collaboration with Tom Jenkins in Fly.
Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for being here. Before I read, I want to thank Axel and everybody at 7x7.L.A. and Quentin and everyone at Beyond Baroque. When Axel called this a game, he was describing it perfectly. It's exactly what it was in terms of this interplay with Tom and his art. I think I've almost never felt so free. So this is a piece called Fly. It's like an itch, a fucking itch. I can't get rid of it. This impulse to move. To move? No, not just to move. That sounds so linear, so directed, when what I'm talking about is more in the realm of a spasm, series of spasms. Itch becomes twitch, becomes switch, becomes which, as in, which way am I going? Which direction do I turn? All of them at once, if this buzzing in my brain is any indication. Too much information, too many stimuli. The possibilities are endless, so endless I cannot even recognize them as possibilities. Instead, I hum and waver, spin myself in circles, Doppler out through time and space in a cacophony of vapor trails, leave nothing but the merest traces, echoes of my circling, of my turns. I keep thinking about Yoko Ono. The body is the scar of the mind. The body, yes, or the echoes it leaves behind. How could it be any different when the air remains full of swirls and tracks? It takes a special set of eyes to see them, compound eyes, thousands of simple lenses, not just second sight, but a mosaic vision, world in 3 dimensions like collage. The pattern only asserts itself when we have gone still and silent, when we have finished moving. Death, perhaps, or maybe a respite, a moment to catch our breath. I heard a fly buzz when I died, Emily Dickinson wrote in Another Century. Ink scratches like spasms on paper. But what about Musca domestica itself? Can it hear its buzzing? Or is that below the surface? A series of spirals like whispers, evaporating, although not really. Fly. Fly, I. 16 eyes, each blue with a black pupil at the center, pinned as if the world were a construction of the mind. 16 eyes, that invariable variable, 4 squared, 2 cubed, cubic space. We are all just small containers looking outward as we circle, as we fly. squared, foursquared, as if we might leave a trace of ourselves at every destination, some sort of existential residue. Does anything happen if we don't see it? Does anything happen if it does not cross our eye? Is a fly swatted if it doesn't watch the wand come down the flat edge of the swatter like an apocalypse in real time? My wife, she loves to swat flies, although no, perhaps loves is not the proper word. It's not bloodlust after all. Not killing for the sake of killing, but more a reaction to all that buzzing, all those eyes. Sometimes on an afternoon in summer, I watch her in the kitchen tracking a housefly until it lands. Slow and silent, like a hunter, she rises up behind it until, boom, the fly swatter lands with a sharp crack. It does not sound like a gunshot. No need to be metaphorical. It sounds like exactly what it is. Small splinter of doom, after which she gathers up the carcass, drops it in the trash in a paper towel. This is, I want to say, what happens to all of us. But then that's not really true, or is it? From the illusion of sight to the dustbin of history, we are already gone, even as we circle, eyes wide open, looking to circumnavigate, swat. But what are eyes without faces? What are eyes without a frame? What are eyes if they are disembodied, if they don't add up to anything? Eyes, flies, distinct and differentiated, until that is, they are not. It makes me think of math. Although I don't believe in numbers, lack faith in their ability to console, where are the questions in a set of numbers? Where are the variables we can't explain? Numbers only speak to us when they are running out, like sand in an hourglass, like an eye about to close. Until that moment, they're useless. Knowledge that doesn't add up to anything larger than itself. No, we need to blur the lines to see form square cut out of chaos, even as we know it will revert. No, we need to coalesce the circles to see them become cubes and squares like floor tiles, a pattern across which for a moment anyway, we might walk. No, we need to invent a new order to see our eyes framed by nose and chin. Call it shape, call it coherence, call it the imagination playing off the raw data of perception and imposing upon it certain textures, certain rules. It's uncanny how quickly this can happen. Just take a gander at the moon, an ancient rock in space upon which we have projected millennia of fantasies. I'm looking at one now, man in the moon, nose small, less than fully centered, single eye, like that of a cyclops protruding from forehead. Would you believe me if I told you it grew out of the grid, out of the background? A momentary assumption before the mosaic shatters and the tiles, the squares, break into background again? Moon. I saw a ghost once. I was 19, asleep in an apartment bedroom in West Philadelphia. Middle of the night, my girlfriend and I nestled across a single mattress, bottom of an old bunk bed. It was humid. It was human also. It was humid, and we must have been naked, plastered to the sheets with sweat. The ghost climbed the wall like a pair of wings, translucent, as if a film had swept across my eyes. Film? No. Fly, eye, enormous insect, Luna moth bleached clear. It did not have a face, not even a head. Not that I remember, although it did have two small black balls for eyes, not unlike the ghost I'm seeing at this moment, arms raised in menace or in supplication, face two ragged lines of dots and dashes, haunting as a bit of code. What is this ghost trying to show me? What does this ghost want to say? Get out, isn't that what ghosts are always shouting? Although in Philadelphia, it didn't feel that way. Philadelphia, city of brotherly love. And what if I were to tell you that this is where I met my wife, or as she was in that place at that time, my girlfriend, that this was where I fell in love? What is love if not a spasm? What we are also, seeds and whispers, a set of wings, a passing shape, a breath of the imagination, ghost. And is it all just movement towards distinction, or is extinction the more appropriate term? The lifespan of a fly is 24 hours, a single day in which to be born, to mature, to dream and fly and fuck, and then grow old and die. That is, if you're not swatted first. A day, it isn't much, hardly even a promise or a breath. Still, what if that is all you have? I remember that ghost, the fine lines of its demarcation, those wings articulated but remote, ethereal, as if hardly even there. I remember how they sparkled like cellophane, flashing blue and white in the darkness of that room. I wonder what they concealed or contained, whether they existed or were the leftover fabric of a dream. You know what I mean? The waking dream that doesn't feel like sleeping, although what else could it be? Earlier this year, I had a dream like that, a voice as I was on the edge of sleeping, warning of my own impending death. Ever since, I've had Elmore James stuck in my head. I believe my time ain't long. The lyric was added to Dust My Broom at some point after the original Robert Johnson recording was made in room 414 of the Gunter Hotel in San Antonio, Texas in 1936. But that's the point, isn't it? The blues are a living form. And yet what is living? Just this, time for as long as we possess it, which is another way of saying dream. Snake eyes. In ancient Rome, they were called the dog throw, bad luck, losing toss. However, I don't see it that way. I love dogs, find deep consolation in their company. For me, dog throw would win the game. Still, here they are, stark black and white, dot, dot, like a message sent by a telegraph. Dot, dot designates the letter I in Morse code. I, fly. Dot, dot is the building block, the letter that asserts itself as word. Word? Not only that, but personality as well. How many of my sentences, my thoughts begin with that letter? I, me, mine, I, me, mine, I, me, mine. Once I was asked to list the words I use to excess. Is it a surprise that these are those I chose? How could it be otherwise when the face in the mirror is my own? Eyes pinned and piercing, tiny black pupils like students of the world, nose and mouth, a snout like a dog face, which is what American GIs were called in Europe during the Second World War. And at the bottom, yes, that fly again. Segmented leg protruding, unclear who is devouring whom. Flies are a source of protein. Yes, they are, although I've never eaten one on purpose. Yet in the end, they will swarm over me. Fly, I, that long progression, extinction to identity, or is it the other way around? Either way, filtered through my gazing, eyes. And now we come to the finale, all our faces, all our eyes spread out across the table, map of overlapping circles, dogs and humans, and that pesky fly. Dogs are great, but dogs are temporary, as we are. Every time I'm with one, I think about the shortness of time. Time, their time, our time. It's interchangeable in the end. Today is my birthday, 55, pair of fives, puppy paws, pair of sunflowers, pair of roses in the vernacular of the dice. From dog throw to puppy paws, from fly to I and back again. I want to be a pair of sunflowers. I want to be a pair of roses. I want to be a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. I want to be a bleached white jawbone still fitted with a line of failing teeth. This morning on the internet, I was reading about the Tufts Love skull, a complete Tyrannosaurus Rex skull unearthed in Montana, along with vertebrae, ribs, hips, and lower jaw. The skull is 66 million years old, which gives a new, old spin to the question of time, of immortality, of what remains and what dissipates. I fly. I am that dinosaur, a ring of bone beneath my skin. Fly, I. These stories are my fossil record, trace of my existence, to be uncovered or forgotten as time insists. I don't believe in posterity or eternity. I don't believe in anything but this. Just you and me, and that's reality, the long and the short of it. I. Thank you very much.
David Ulin, folks, please give it up again. Thanks, David. We have one final collaboration. Ilana Masad in collaboration with Jean Desaganza in Blue, Blood, and Fury. Give it up to Ilana.
Thank you all for your patience waiting through all of these, and for the wonderful, wonderful readers who have come before me and whose work I love so much, and to 7x7 and Axel and Beyond Baroque. And of course, to the wonderful artist whose name I think is pronounced Jean because he's French, but I'm not positive. So let's hope I'm correct. Bleu, Blood, and Fury. Pregnant with possibility, with child and dread, Bleu sat on her swollen rump in the forest and watched the setting sun cast fiery rays among the branches. An ant crawled along her calf and she flicked it away. Ever since she was a child, she'd feared insects crawling into her crevices. A recurring childhood nightmare involved sitting down to pee and discovering an army of ants marching out of her. But now that a more minuscule insect-like thing had swum inside her and created something that kicked and shoved her bladder with such force, the six-legged, smushable life forms held no power over her. Bleu had nowhere to go. She had a past, but she wanted no part in it. She couldn't keep its language out of her mouth or its images out of her mind, but she could damn well refuse to tell anyone about it. To find a place to stay, she'd need to convince people, organizations, clipboard checkboxes, uniforms. She didn't want to. So she sat in the forest and the sun set and it grew colder. Her ass was numb and she imagined her entire body becoming pins and needles as she sank into the bark of the tree trunk she leaned against. She wished for the branches, so recently aflame with violent light, to curl around her stricken form and contain her. She could be rewombed by it, cradled in it. Her own belly could stop in its tracks. They could be a nested doll, infant and woman in oak. Chiming bells woke her from her sleep. The nearby church was announcing mass. She had slept the night through. Bleu still had nowhere to go. Even before she discovered the parasite, she'd known what she'd name him, if he was a him. She'd name him Ver, Vert if she was a she, Vert if they were both or if they were neither or both. But that was an idle plan, dreamt up in a long lost carefree time. Now an actual growing fetus was consuming what she was, hungering as she did, thirsting for the same water she needed for her parched throat. And she no longer knew if the name would be apt. Over the last hours of fitful sleep and trudging in the direction of unseen bells, she'd grown sick of natural colors in the forest, aching for gunmetal grays, the toxic orange of waste, the shimmering rainbow of oil, the colors of a destructive humanity. The doors of the church were as brown as the trees she'd emerged from, but at least the brick around it was its own unique burgundy, divorced from pure nature. She knocked. With no response, no whisper of movement inside, she entered. Dreams often start this way, with nonsensical images, beauty indescribable yet vivid enough to call to the unconscious mind and keep it lulled. In this dream that wasn't, Bleu held her belly instinctively and surrendered her nose to the thick scent of death as she walked into a room full of orchids. The church was no church. It had no ceiling. It was an empty frame with an apparently working bell tower at the far end. In between the door and the tower was a greenhouse, its door open. The humid warmth worked its way into Bleu's hair, slipped between her fingers and the delicate folds in the back of her neck. The smell barely bothered her. After all, it was familiar. Fairy tales do away with time. When the princess sleeps for 100 years, it only takes a full stop and another word to keep going. And the princess slept for 1,000 years, for 100 years. Then, Bleu stayed at the orchid farm for what felt like eons. There was no one else there when she entered, and she never found another soul. There was only her, and she slipped into the role of groundskeeper, gardener, waterer of orchids, puller of weeds, destroyer of pests if dangerous, and leaver alone of the ones that weren't. Perhaps there had been someone else here before her who had assumed these roles, but when she entered, they must have been released from their bondage and run off, grateful for their freedom. And still, the child sat inside her, caged by her body as she was by the church that wasn't. Some nights she would climb the bell tower, whose mechanism she didn't understand, but which worked quite smoothly without her interference. She would look out the window at the top and see the forest she'd come from stretching on and on. It was the only view of the outside world. The stained glass windows of the church were too rippled to see anything through. She stayed and she stayed and she stayed. Something kept her from opening the door and emerging. The smell of rotting roadkill emitted by the orchids became indistinguishable from any other scent. She thought that if her child arrived while she was still there, it would be well equipped to handle the world at large. After all, it would be entering into the flowery contradiction of Bleu's narrowed existence. This is where time becomes a problem. Bleu stayed, day after day, for a long, long time. And then, but before Bleu, everyone was a before, everyone has a before and an after too. There were other people, other stories. There was her mother, a woman with a soft voice and a presence that could terrify small children and impress adults. There was her father, a man Bleu never met, and the stepfather who had been born far away with a different mother tongue, who worked hard and learned a new language and fell in love and stayed with Bleu and her mother. And before Bleu watching over the orchids, there was Yehoshua, a slender man with plump lips and a patch of skin on one cheek that never grew any hair, an irregularity that left him deeply self-conscious and eternally clean-shaven. He had stumbled into the church one night, wishing to call his God upon him, to ask his God to smite him for entering a church, an idol-worshipping place. Instead, he discovered the carrion smell and the infinite shades of purple. His anger at his God subsided in time, and a deep peace invaded his very veins until he became sluggish and slow, tired, until he lay down in the soil one day and allowed himself to be consumed by it, bit by bit, wondering all the time whether this was a natural death or his God finally smiting him, never considering the possibility that it could be neither. And after Bleu, well, someone else will show up. Bleu remembered and imagined a million stories during her time in the church. She told her stone child, for it had stopped kicking and some time ago and grown still and warm, pulsing gently, as many stories as she thought up, and she began to yearn for the after to come a little bit quicker. She missed the air. On the morning of Bleu's last day in the church, she woke up in the mossy patch near the confessional that had become her bed and ran her hands over the taut skin of her belly. The child had been shrinking slightly, slowly, and her stomach with it. She thought that it too yearned for air. Most living things, she was pretty sure, withered without it. It wasn't until she'd stepped outside and placed her hand on a young tree growing in the middle of the path that she realized what she'd done or where she was. She'd broken free, though it wasn't through any conscious thought or careful decision-making. Bleu was not prone to care, and her thoughts ran together for the most part, consumed by daily practicalities, the upkeep of the orchids. When had she plotted her escape? The day was bright, most likely spring or perhaps late summer. She had lost track of the seasons, but she knew enough still to look ahead and not back. There are stories about those who look back. They lose their beloveds. They turn into stone or salt. They are stuck on the couches of psychoanalysts. There are worse fates, Bleu knew, but still, she didn't want her own story to end in permanent stasis. Walking felt good. She thwacked into low-hanging tree branches, the pain of the physical world bracing. She scrambled her way through the underbrush, collecting scratches, bruises, and trickles of blood as if they were butterfly kisses. A double heartbeat pounded in her ears, one familiar and one chasing its way to life. She didn't stop when the sun began to set. She walked toward the watercolor sky and watched the bats begin to flutter out of their treetop or cavernous homes, blind and brilliant. In the deep dark of night, Bleu's eyes adjusted and her innards began to spasm. In a moonlit clearing, she sat, clutching her swollen self, waiting. She didn't know what for. At this point in a story involving a pregnancy, a child must be born. Alive or dead, it must come out somehow. The allotted amount of time had long passed, and a part of Bleu that clung to the strict guidelines of a reality she no longer fit in knew something was wrong. Because no person can endure a years-long gestation. No person can live on air and weeds and the sound of bells. If she let her mind dwell in this, the land of impossibilities, Bleu was pretty sure she would die. There were few things she wanted, but life was one of them. Strange as it was, the past that had hurt her so had not stripped this simple desire from her, and so she let her hips settle, allowed her legs to splay. A moan more powerful than her body was capable of nevertheless escaped her throat. Deep and earth-shattering, it called out. Bodies surrounded her in the soft light of a refracted sun, and her eyes shut tight, unwilling to see the horned and furred bodies, the clawed paw pads and sleek underbellies. But she could hear them, the rustling and huffing, the snuffling of snouts as they gathered round, urging her on. Velvety tails wiped sweat from her brow, muscled bodies allowed her to clutch them. Until finally, out it came in a rush of blood and fury. It's you, Bleu said. It's me, she said. Hello, I have been carrying you for a long time, Bleu said. I know, she said. I love you, Bleu said. Do you? She said. You have a lousy way of showing it. I do, I will, I'll do better, Bleu said. Good, she said. What next? Bleu asked. Whatever we want, she said. The clearing was empty of anyone but Bleu, and as the sun rose in a sky as bloody as her fingernails, she considered a return. To where, to what, she wasn't certain. But she was no longer alone. She had herself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ilana. Give it up, give it up. Yeah, thank you. That's all for the readings for tonight. Thanks again to Axel and to all the artist and writer collaborations. Please hang out, check out our patio. We have books for sale in the bookstore. And we have some wine in the patio along with some water. So please stick around and have a good night. Thanks for being here.